Welcome to episode 1 of the FWD Baseball Podcast. I'm Alex,
I'm Steve.
and today we're going to be talking about the playoffs so far, the wild card series, the division series. We'll give you our takes on this new expanded playoff format for this 2020 season, and we'll preview the American League and National League Championship Series.
Without further ado, let's play ball.
As we start today's episode, we record this podcast one day after the death of Whitey Ford. Whitey Ford, as everyone knows, one of the great pitchers of all time, career Yankee, 10-time All-Star, 6-time World Series champion. He won the 1961 Cy Young Award and World Series MVP. Just an all-around fantastic pitcher, fantastic man. He had a great life. He lived to be 91 years of age. And he had the opportunity to spend so much of that time in later life with his family here in New York. He also served our country, spent 2 years in the United States Army, where he served during the Korean War, and just an all-around great man, great baseball player, and our thoughts are with his family for their loss at this time.
So we were very lucky to have Whitey as, of course, a Yankee, seeing him all those years at all the old-timers games, just being absolute beacon of exceptionalism, of course, for the Yankees as well as the city of New York. He really was just obviously an incredible pitcher, but also an incredible person. And we were very lucky to have him. And I'm personally very lucky to actually have his autograph as well. So we're very thankful to the Ford family for, giving us Whitey and letting him be obviously in our lives.
Yeah, that's an autograph you want to hold on to for a long time. I mean, really the last of sort of that great generation of not just Yankees baseball, but New York baseball. The peak of it all in the 50s. And of course, Whitey played into the 60s on some of those great Yankee teams. But just an all-around great man. Like you said, his presence at Old Timers Day as really, towards the end, the greatest living Yankee. And just a wonderful human being. A real New Yorker, true and true. And sorry for his loss. I think that it's fitting on a day we discuss Whitey Ford and all his excellence and his winning and his exceptional World Series play that we talk about what's going on in the playoffs right now. We're halfway through the playoffs. Well, sort of, kind of. We've gone through 2 series. We just finished the division series last night. And it's been sort of a wild, crazy postseason with these new expanded playoffs, the expanded wild card round. Steve, what do you thought of the postseason so far?
Yeah, it definitely has felt like it's already been quite the postseason, Obviously, going back years and years ago, it was just the World Series. They added on the Championship Series and so on and so forth. Now we're all the way up to having 8 teams in the playoffs. We'll see what happens going forward. But for this year, it's definitely felt like a very big postseason. And a lot has happened so far, going on the wild card first. There's been, obviously, some stuff has been completely expected. You have your easy series with the Tampa Bay Rays beating up the Blue Jays. No big surprise there. Los Angeles Dodgers beating up the Milwaukee Brewers. Again, no big surprise there. But we've had some definitely more interesting series and a couple of upsets as well, probably due to the expanded playoffs. So, for example, you've had the upset of the Marlins over the Cubs, which no one really saw that one coming, unless you thought it was 2003. And you, of course, had the Astros, who got into the postseason on a sub-500 record, 29-31, upsetting the Twins, the AL Central winner. So pretty big upset right there, among a few other more competitive series as well.
Yeah, you mentioned those first 2 series you mentioned, the Dodgers against the Brewers. I mean, this wasn't the Brewers' year. Yelich had a down year, and he's really been just the force behind that team. They found some nice pieces in their rotation throughout the year and in their bullpen. They ended up getting hurt before the series. So the Brewers weren't prepared to tackle the league's best team in the Dodgers, who you really feel may be gearing up for finally getting over the hump and winning their first World Series since the 80s. And you also mentioned the no surprise with the Rays beating the Blue Jays. The Rays have just been a tremendous organization, really, for the last, 12 years since Joe Madden first took them to win a pennant. Obviously, Kevin Cash, succeeding him as Rays manager, has done a great job these last few years. And they beat a young Blue Jays team. And the Blue Jays, they obviously were right there to compete with the Yankees all season. They gave them a run for their money for second place in that division, but they're just not quite there yet. They don't have the pitching. They have great young offensive talent. You know, the kids of all the legends, some of which performed excellently and some of which maybe haven't performed up to what we expect of them. But then you're right, two of those wild upset series would be the Astros and the Marlins beating the Twins and the Cubs, the Central Division winners that couldn't seem to put anything together. Really, it was the offense, I think, that couldn't carry them. And when you have teams like Minnesota, which has studs in the lineup, they were without Josh Donaldson, I know, but you still have a ton of great players up and down that lineup. They just couldn't hit against Houston. And the Cubs, same thing. They faced that young Marlins pitching. Really haven't hit that well all season, to be fair, from the Cubs. You're talking about the regulars from the championship not really contributing all that much offensively during the season. But they lost to a young and exciting Marlins team with great young arms. So it's interesting to see those big Central Titans be brought down and not be able to score.
Yeah, definitely a big surprise on the whole. The Central hasn't actually had any representation in the division series, as crazy as that is. It's just been East and West. We'll get to the division series in just a minute, but just to finish up the wild card results, all of these were, like, we've had, again, pretty crazy results. We also had a couple of more interesting matchups. For example, the Yankees and Indians, where I think most people pretty much had it on the Indians due to their incredible pitching. Really, the Indians, year in and year out, I feel like at this point, going back to when they first had Kluber in his first Cy Young year, the best starting pitching in the league. And once again, they have who I think should be the MVP, Shane Bieber, starting game one and then throwing a clunker against the Yankees. Go figure, just kind of happens that way. And then the Yankees went on to handle Cookie Carrasco and then got to advance to the next round. Definitely a bit of an upset there. Another one that was definitely a more competitive series was the Athletics and the White Sox. So they were, I think a lot of people were expecting the White Sox really to show the A's what they could do, being the young upstart team, that they had a lot of energy. They actually have a couple of really good pitchers in Keuchel and Giolito, and they definitely kept it very competitive. But Oakland just seemed to have more of that pitching depth and managed to squeak out a win after dropping game one. So, credit where credit is due. Oakland definitely got them there. What is it? The last two series, of course, were the Braves versus the Reds, which was a complete pitching showdown. The Reds, unfortunately, just lost all their hitting at the worst possible time, all their clutch hitting. They actually had 11 hits in game one in a 13-inning game, but they just couldn't capitalize. And I think that really shows how good the Braves actually are. The Braves have this very young staff, and they don't even have Soroka this year. But they have some incredible pitching on that team. So the Reds just weren't able to keep up with them. And while the Reds pitching did keep the Braves down, the Braves had a couple of truly incredible performances from Ozuna and Freeman this year. So, it was not altogether unexpected, but honestly a very good couple of games right there.
Yeah, those three series. So before you get into the Padres series, I think it's interesting because it was sort of counter to what a lot of people were thinking. The Yankees, like you said, despite them being the Yankees and having this star-studded lineup, they have Garrett Cole, they kind of were the underdogs in this series. As weird as that is to say, against a
Without a
pretty
doubt,
young
they were.
Cleveland team, and when you're facing Shane Bieber, even when you have Garrett Cole on the mound, the way Bieber was throwing the ball, you're even the underdog in that game. And so it's interesting to see the Yankees, like you said, took care of Bieber, had a clunker, and then in the wild rain shortened game that Rob Manfred will eventually answer for, probably not, but we'll see. They managed to pull out a win there despite not having their best performances from Tanaka. So that was an interesting series. The Brave series I had completely wrong. I really thought that the Reds were going to be a team to beat, with Bauer and Castillo and Gray. And you're right, the two starting pitchers, Castillo and Bauer, they brought it. They were effective, and especially Trevor Bauer. But the Braves got some tremendous performances out of Fried, and they showed that even without Soroka, they can pitch, and we know that they can hit, and they eventually showed that in that series. The other series you talked about was the Oakland series, another series that I had completely wrong. I really believe that in that short wild card series, 3-game series, the White Sox with Giolito and Keuchel had a leg up, and taking game one, felt pretty good about it. That White Sox offense is also, it's a great offense. We know Abreu, Anderson, Jimenez, so many great pieces in that Chicago team. I think their future is very bright. I thought it would be a little sooner that they would advance in the playoffs, but wasn't right there for them. But one of the more interesting series and closer series was that San Diego series, Steve.
Yeah, no kidding right there. So, I mean, obviously, just looking at the standings themselves, the Padres actually had the third best major league record. So, there was obviously a lot of high hopes for the Padres. But if there's one thing you can count on, it's St. Louis being competitive in the postseason. They've made that known going back all the way to 2006, where they kind of squeaked in themselves and just went on to win the whole thing. You should never underestimate a Cardinals team. So, and I don't think the Padres did, thankfully.
Yeah, the Padres obviously are sort of playing with fire that series. They didn't really have the starting pitching that they expected to have coming into the series. Obviously, with Clevenger not being there for that series, but they lost game one. They went down 1-0 in their home ballpark. Managed to come back. They had that great offensive showing in game two. Obviously, always some excitement with Fernando Tatis Jr. there hitting home runs, and they put it together in game three to advance. And so that was a really exciting series, and I didn't expect the Cardinals to put on that performance because, like you said, Padres had one of the best records in Major League Baseball, the third best record in all of Major League Baseball. So it was an exciting wild card round. Like you said, a lot of surprises, some non-surprises, and people taking care of business. But a fun round, and I liked the 3 games versus the 1 game that we normally see in a wild card round. Obviously, it made sense with this expanded postseason to do more than 1 game, but it was a fun round.
Yeah, definitely agreed there. No, I would personally. I've obviously been a big fan of the wild card game, but I would not mind the shift to a 3-game wild card series going forward. I think this is a really good idea, and I think this would be honestly pretty good for the game. Also, would help even out that whole 1 game, you winner take all, anything can happen kind of atmosphere. So in this case, the better team would theoretically come out on top.
Yeah, I've
So
always had an interesting idea as far as how do you do a wild card game that's more fair to the top wild card, the home team wild card in the normal wild card format rather than, like you said, that 1 game. You said you'd be in favor of a 3-game series. I sort of have a wild idea of a 2-game series, right? How does that work? The 2-game series works in that the home team, the top seeded team, has to win 1 game, whereas the lower seeded team has to win 2 games. And so it's just sort of give that little nugget to the top seeded team, because what if you have a team like, the Rays last year were an excellent wild card team. What if they're playing a team like the Astros this year, which are under 500? And just so make it fair to the team that achieved more. We'll see what they do going forward as far as the wild card round and expanded playoffs. But I thought it was a very fun round, and you're right. I think the 3-game series made it a little fairer, despite the upsets that we saw.
this is definitely a great round, and it's definitely always a lot of fun to see these crazy upsets. That said, going into the division series, there were only, I would say, really only one significant upset in that series, and that was the Astros over the Athletics. So the A's, despite putting out that grit and really their sneakily good offense and their pretty good, and obviously their excellent bullpen, just wasn't really enough to contain Houston. Houston has been pretty much on fire, I would say. They scored at least 5 runs every game. They scored 5 runs in game 2. They scored 7 runs in game 3, 10 in game 1, and 11 in game 4. The Athletics just couldn't keep them down. It really, very, very surprising from an Oakland team that has honestly completely controlled the AL West basically throughout the entire season. Despite it only being 60 games, Oakland pretty much had it on lock and won it by, I think, over 7 games or about 7 games. And then the Astros kind of just strolled right in, getting hot at the right time, using that truly excellent offense that we already knew that they had, but then it just came to life, specifically with Carlos Correa hitting 500 for the series with 3 homers and 11 ribbies. Very, very dominant performance from him.
I think you're right. It really was a case of Oakland not being able to hold those guys down. And even when Oakland would take the lead in games, they were never out, despite Oakland's great pitching. And it really is the usual faces for the Astros. A lot has been talked about the Astros, and I'm sure down the line we can address what's been said about the Astros and the scandal going back to 2017 and who knows continuing for how long. But you have to give credit where credit's due. And the faces that we know on the Astros, Altuve, Bregman, Correa, Brantley for the last 2 years, Springer, they put it together. And they slugged their way into the American League Championship Series. So give credit where credit's due. They did what they needed to do when the time came around. These are playoff experienced players. And they came through for the Astros. And Oakland, despite, like you said, having the lead in the division the whole season, just weren't able to hold them down. Now, what's interesting is that Houston in the years past have really done it not only with the offense, but with that great pitching. Last few years, Garrett Cole, obviously Justin Verlander through this whole big run, Zach Greinke for the last few years. And you haven't seen that. You haven't seen that from Houston. Their starting pitching performance has not been great. McCullers wasn't great in this round. Greinke wasn't great in this round. Valdez was pretty good in this round. I give credit where credit's due. But overall, they're not getting those Verlander, Cole, 2019 Greinke performances, and they're slugging their way to it with those familiar faces. So got to give Houston credit. Hate to give Houston credit, but have to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, I definitely hate to give them credit. That is true.
And they're in the American League Championship Series once again. And it feels like this is what we see every year. They're back at it.
Fourth straight there. So, again, as you said, credit where credit is due to Houston. We'll see how it carries them forward. Hopefully, Zach Greinke, being the true professional and probable future Hall of Famer that he is, will probably find something in the tank. Just be able to get like a nice 6-inning outing probably out of him. But the rest of the starting pitching, we'll see, because McCullers has been very hot and cold, so we'll see how he turns out. And then there's Jose Urquidy, so we don't even really know what to expect out of him. So we'll see how that carries them against Tampa, where we can get onto, I guess, Tampa versus the Yankees right now. Which one hell of a series. Let's just say that. One hell of a series, back and forth, just completely so competitive all the way to almost to the very end of Game 5. Absolutely just super entertaining, edge of your seat thriller. It obviously did not work out in the Yankees' favor, which, obviously we're both upset about, but at the same time, this was just a great series to watch. If you needed to watch a postseason series, this was the one that I hope people watched.
This definitely was the series, and it didn't disappoint with that intensity, like you said. We knew coming into this that these two teams saw themselves as the best teams in the American League. And not only did they see themselves as that, but they didn't like each other on top of it. Obviously spilling over to what happened during this regular season, but going back for years, the Yankees and the Rays seemed to have a problem. And Kevin Kiermaier stated it before the series. Brett Gardner affirmed that they don't like us, we don't like them, was what Kiermaier said. And you know it to be true. And I'm happy that there were no extracurriculars in the series, but that didn't take away from the intensity of each game. Even though there were some games where, you had a 6-run win or a 4-run win twice, every game was intense and it was close because you thought every team could come back or any pitcher could shut you down. So it was just really exciting series right from the get-go.
Yes, no kidding. And I think the key to the victory here for the Rays was, definitely coming in at the end was definitely their depth of pitching, just as, we've seen all season. Kevin Cash is not afraid to deploy his stable of guys who could throw 98. and they definitely came through for the Rays throughout the series. Just being able to quiet the Yankees as much as possible, especially in Game 3 and Game 5, of course. So that was definitely their key to victory. The Yankees definitely showed up, and they showed up in pretty grand fashion, of course, pun intended, from Game 1, where it was, once again, edge of your seat, only the Yankees were only up 4-3 going into the ninth. Then Aaron Hicks added on a run, and before Giancarlo just broke the game open. So that was, despite the final score, was a very close game. But the Yankees' offense was definitely more consistent this time around, up until Game 5. So whereas the Yankees scored 9 runs, then they scored 5 runs, and they scored 4 runs, and then they scored 5 runs again. They only managed to scratch across a single run against Tampa's extremely impressive pitching, and that's just how it goes sometimes.
I think you made a good point with Cash effectively using his stable of guys that we like to call them now. And Boone didn't have that luxury. You know, we're used to the Yankees bullpen with a lot more arms that you trust coming into the game. And this year, Boone really trusted 3 guys. He trusted Chapman, he trusted Britton, he trusted Green. And for the most part, those guys were extremely effective in the series. He didn't bring in guys like Ottavino. He didn't bring in guys like Loizaga or Sessa. These guys he didn't trust in high leverage situations. You know, he doesn't have Dellin Betances, didn't have Tommy Kahnle this year. These people aren't there anymore. And so when you have a 3-man bullpen and you really only set up for one starter that can give you any length, you're at a disadvantage right from the get-go in these short series. And sure enough, the Rays, with their depth of pitching, showed that they're going to come out on top. Well, I want to give a shout out also to Randy Arozarena, because he has been so good for the Rays. And I heard one of the Rays announcers calling him the Cuban Mookie Betts. Just a really exciting player. Obviously came up in the Cardinals farm system, like another player on the Yankee side, Luke Voigt, who had a tremendous season. So you got to wonder what the Cardinals are doing with their farm. But really just an exciting player who had a great series. And I think the Rays have a lot of great pieces. You know, we're used to them being the nobodies. I think now they come to the ALCS probably as the favorites, and more of their names are now household names, starting with Arozarena.
Oh, no doubt about it. Arozarena is just unbelievably special player. He was just locked in really for the whole series, and you know he definitely did damage. He had 8 hits throughout the entire series, so you know definitely one of the offensive keys to the Rays' victory there. So yeah, that was more or less how the Yankees Rays turned out. Let's just jump over to the National League real quick, where it wasn't as exciting as the American League Division Series, I will say. Let's just get the Braves and the Marlins out of the way. This really was a pretty clear-cut matchup. I mean, for one thing, let's just say this. The Marlins have finally lost a postseason series. This is the first postseason series ever that Miami has lost. That's a shock. But at the same time, you look at the guys that they were putting on the field, it's not that big of a shock, honestly. Miami has a fantastic rotation. They really do, and they're very young. So this team is situated exceptionally well going forward. But when you look at the offense for these guys, I mean, they scored 5 runs in game 1, but then they were shut out the next 2 games. So this was not terribly unexpected against an Atlanta team that was really, once again, has such excellent pitching, really just fantastic pitching on the team. And again, just those couple of really huge bats. Well, Acuna wasn't a huge presence in this one. Shockingly, Travis d'Arnaud was actually a huge part of this one, actually getting 7 ribbies himself. He hit 600 for the series. Dansby Swanson was a big contributor. It really, you just had these guys that could hit. And it wasn't even the big 3 this time. It wasn't Freeman. It wasn't Ozuna. Well, Ozuna had a hit there, but it really was mostly d'Arnaud and these other guys, as well as Atlanta's truly amazing starting pitching. So this one was just pretty much, this was expected. And no one was terribly surprised by the results in this one.
Yeah, this is clear cut overmatched in a postseason series. Now, I thought the same thing would happen in the wild card round for the Marlins when they're playing Yu Darvish and Kyle Hendricks, and yet they managed to beat the Cubs. And say what you will about the Marlins and the Cubs playing in the playoffs, but here we have really just an overmatched Marlins team. Like you said, the pitching of the Braves, the hitting of the Braves, it's just better than the Marlins. And the Marlins have a future ahead of them. I'm excited about with their young rotation, but they weren't enough this year to take out the Braves. So, like you said, d'Arnaud is really the star for the Braves. I mean, who would have thought Travis d'Arnaud would hit 600 in a postseason series, driving 7 runs?
And
I
another
think
X-Med just killing it in the postseason. Go figure.
it seems to happen. Seems to happen with that franchise, and
Yeah.
really just put it all together and had a great season overall, really. But the series was tremendous. And like you said, Acuna after game one didn't really show up. Maybe it's his talking getting the best of him. He said they got to hit him because they can't get me out, and they proceeded to get him out. So it's funny how baseball works sometimes. But you're right. It wasn't the normal guys. It wasn't Acuna. It wasn't Freeman. But it really was these other guys, and it shows the depth of their lineup and the strength of their pitching, giving up 5 runs over 3 games, all in the first game. So just a really strong performance for the Braves, and I think it must give you some confidence into the Braves, even though you were playing the Miami Marlins going into the championship series.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at this team, obviously, now because they swept the Marlins, they obviously had the most amount of time to rest up. And that's going to be huge for your starting pitching. Obviously, Max Fried who's now a household name, as you mentioned, but also rookie Ian Anderson, who pitched beautifully this year, by the way. I believe he had a sub-2 ERA. Really just a fantastic, I mean, granted, obviously a short season, but he pitched absolutely fantastic this year, and it has not stopped in the postseason. That and Kyle Wright, who actually was the Braves, I believe, their number one prospect. He has been, vaulted as this incredible. He's the next coming of their great rotation. He's going to be fantastic. He actually had a pretty rocky year, but in this series, he looked like that guy that they envisioned. So Kyle Wright definitely was a big contributor. So between Fried, Anderson, and Wright, you got a scary 3 guys to face right there in Atlanta. So, you better watch out. If their bullpen can hold you down, and their offense obviously does what they need to do, this is a scary team. I mean, obviously, they're going up against the Dodgers, but at the same time, we shouldn't underrate how good this team really is.
Right, it's a scary team going up against a scary team in the Los Angeles Dodgers. And the Dodgers, they took care of business against the San Diego Padres. They swept them in 3 games. Another
Oh yeah,
series where you thought maybe the Padres challenged the Dodgers a little bit. They played pretty well against them during the regular season. They don't really like each other as well, similar animosity to the Yankees and Rays. And you thought this could be one of those great classic series of NL West rivals, but instead it was really the Dodgers being the Dodgers.
kidding there. I would definitely agree to that. The Dodgers, as a team, had an 815 OPS. That's pretty excellent. They really just took care of business. Their offense was really good. Their fielding was really good. And their pitching, once again, was really good, including by Clayton Kershaw, who, granted, didn't throw a shutout or anything, but still gave them 6 innings of 3-run ball. Quality start. Definitely more than enough for his offense to get the job done. Between Kershaw, Urias, Bueller, May, this insane, super deep bullpen with, of course, closer Kenley Jansen, who actually was probably the worst one of the bunch. But you have just incredible talent. Just talent on this team. I can't even just say pitching or offense or anything. Just talent in general. And that's kind of what it was. The Padres are kind of like the much younger little brother going against their big brother who, is going to basically beat them. And that's more or less what happened. I do see that the Padres were at a distinct disadvantage, mostly because they were missing 2 of their pitchers, basically. They were banking on Mike Clevenger to come back healthy, and unfortunately he did not. We're still figuring out what sort of injury he's working through, but he was only able to get 1 inning out of him, which is definitely not what they expected. And the other one was Dinelson Lamet, who has had a sleeper Cy Young case, by the way, has pitched beautifully this year, just excellently. But he was missing for this season, for this series. And that definitely hurt them. That definitely hurt the Padres' chances. When you look at it like that, where they don't have Lamet and they don't have Clevenger, the writing was on the wall for the Padres with this one, and that's just how it goes sometimes. Sometimes you just run into a brick wall, and this brick wall is the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Yeah, run into a brick wall. I think the way the Dodgers are playing, more like you run into a buzzsaw. You're just going to get cut down at this point. And I'm interested to see if the Braves can finally, knock them down a peg maybe and win a game here against the Dodgers, because boy, the Dodgers look really good. Even in that game too, like you mentioned, that Jansen struggled and the Padres were coming back against them. Joe Kelly comes in and shuts the door down. There's just so much depth that you don't see the Dodgers losing, but we will see. You have to play the game on the field. That's the best part about baseball. And so I'm intrigued to see this Braves Dodgers NLCS. But before we get into the American League and Championship Series and we give you our predictions and we just talk about those matchups, Steve, we talked a little bit about the expanded playoffs and how it relates to the wild card round. But what do you think about 8 teams in general in the playoffs? Think that's too many? You think it's been so exciting that you don't care if it's too many? What are your thoughts on that?
So I definitely think it's a few too many. I kind of liked where we were at, where we added in that second wild card team. I think that definitely gave a lot more teams something to play for. It definitely made some teams more aggressive at the trade deadline. And I thought that was good for the sport, adding the second wild card. But then going off and adding an additional 3 teams, I really am not that big a fan of it. And in particular, because you have instances where you're going to get a team like Houston who really just squeaked in with a 29-31 record. Seeing a sub 500 team get into the postseason does not sit well with me, and I understand fully with this postseason format that if we had done it the way that it's been the past couple of years with the second wild card, the Yankees would not be in the postseason, as crazy as that is,
Right.
given how well the teams in the AL Central have done. But it just doesn't sit right that a team like the Astros just was able just to get in because of how awful their division is. And also, seeing Toronto, don't get me wrong, Toronto has a very bright future. And they really just need a couple of things to really fix up the team before they become truly dominant. I think they are going to be really good in a year or two. If not, honestly, could just be next year. But seeing them in the postseason, that also just doesn't make sense to me either. So I think 8 teams is definitely too much. And similarly on the National League side, you could say the Brewers get in and then promptly get out, courtesy of the Dodgers. So once again, it's almost like a formality. It's like, all right, welcome, time to leave. So that it just didn't make sense to me there. It really didn't.
Right. Yeah, for the sake of clarity, so everyone knows, the teams that would not have made the playoffs if we stuck with the format that we've been using since the second wild card was added. In the American League would have been the Yankees, the Blue Jays, and the Astros. In the National League, you wouldn't have had the Brewers, the Marlins, and the Reds.
And see, that kind of makes sense to me because, you see, unfortunately, how poorly the Reds have done. Again, they faced a very, very good Braves team in the wild card round, but, their offense just it really wasn't there. And aside from, Miami Magic, I guess is what you could call it, against the Cubs, this team is not there yet. They're not ready just yet. And the Brewers, again, just haven't been great all year. So
it's interesting you bring up the teams around 500 making the playoffs or teams under 500 making the playoffs. This was sort of a discussion a while ago, and we're going back to the mid 2000s when the Padres won the division with 82 wins in 2005,
mhm.
and they're 2 games over 500, and it's like, okay, but they're not as good as the wild card team. And so that was controversial because it wasn't they're close. It's the Padres are basically a 500 ball club, but because their division's so bad, they make the team. So I make the postseason. So I think you're always going to have sort of that issue if you continue to seat based on division winners. I know this is something that other sports try to resolve, where the division winners make the playoffs, but you're not necessarily seeded third because you're the division winner. Obviously, they have expanded playoffs, so they can do that type of thing when you have 8 teams making the playoffs every year. But it's just interesting to see how you could avoid the under 500 team making the playoffs when you still have that division structure. So I think it's a really important point that Houston wouldn't have made the postseason. Here they are in the American League Championship Series. And it's interesting. It's interesting what the expanded playoffs have brought. I think it's been exciting, but I don't think I want to stick with it. I think I'm in your camp. I want to go back to the format we've been using for the last few years since we've introduced the second wild card and go from there. Baseball doesn't need more teams. If you're
It
gonna
does
play,
not.
if you're gonna play 162 games, those are the teams that are the best teams and deserve to make the playoffs. And I'm very much in favor of going back to that 5-team playoffs per league. And let's hope we bring that back in 2021. We'll see what happens in 2021 with a lot of things. Commissioner can go wild and crazy with all these rules that he loves.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true.
So
Which we'll tackle that in a later podcast as to what Manfred is thinking about doing and what we'd like to see and everything. But
yeah,
a lot can change just going into next year.
let me just say the one good thing about this postseason has been we haven't had that runner on second base in extra innings. I'll leave that at
Uh,
that.
we'll definitely keep that there.
But let's get into these championship series because I'm excited for them. I know our team, the Yankees, they're out of it, but I'm excited for the 4 teams that are still in it.
Oh yes, no doubt about it at all. And as we've already seen through this, these teams are playing great baseball. And you look at the teams even just from the regular season results, and with the exception of the Astros, really these are your best teams. These are your like the Dodgers have been on top all season. Like they have been the favorite since day one. So seeing them in the NLCS going against a very very talented Braves team that is their pitching is just so good. That's going to be an incredible matchup, I think. I really think obviously this is going to be a 7-game set, and there's no off days, which I definitely am not a big fan of. But that's
Another
going to
problem with 2020.
another big problem there. So this is going to be a huge test of pitching depth, and I think if you're going to look at pitching depth as to some of the best teams in the league with it, it's the Dodgers and the Braves. So this is going to be probably not a very high scoring championship series, but at the same time, I think you're going to see who can get it done, who's that reliable reliever you can that they're going to rely on, and who can pull through the clutch hit. I think this is going to be a very competitive series between the Dodgers and the Braves.
Yeah, I think that we have, like you said, the 2 best teams in the National League going against each other. I really do. I'm really encouraged by the way the Braves have pitched as far as making it competitive against the Dodgers. I just think you look at that Dodgers team up and down, every aspect of the team, and they are excellent. Their hitting is tremendous. Their starting pitching as well. Their bullpen and their defense, everything about them is solid. And you really feel like this is the year that we've been waiting for and building for, that the Dodgers finally push through. And it's interesting because every time we seem to have that year for any team, they don't do it. But it would be interesting to see if the Dodgers win their first championship in over 30 years.
I know. Crazy is that, as good as the Dodgers have been over the past decade. This would be the first one since '88 that they've won. Absolutely, and it obviously, crazy season, notwithstanding, it would be a pretty big reason to celebrate. So, the Dodgers, I would definitely think, if you just wanted like get into like who's better at what, basically Dodgers versus Braves. If you got into offense and pitching, and of course fielding as well, just to get fielding out of the way, I think they're pretty set up pretty well. Like they're pretty even fielding team. You have Mookie Betts, who's just an absurdly incredible right fielder for the Dodgers. So you got him out there. Bellinger's had a great season again in center field. you've got your outfield pretty set out there, and even in the infield, you've got a pretty great, somehow the ageless wonder Justin Turner, and Corey Seager's been doing really well himself as well. Like, this is a good fielding team. Atlanta might have a small advantage there, but I don't think it's going to be that significant. Obviously, outfield-wise, I think Ozuna is still playing in the outfield. I think he's been okay. If not, he's been DHing. I'd have to check the stats on that one. But if not, you have Nick Markakis, who is just year in and year out another ageless wonder, just always doing great. Duvall is an underrated. He's a pretty good bat, but he's also a great fielder. We've always known that. And if Inciarte is playing center field, another one of the great ones. So they got their outfield set out there, and they're really just fielding wise. And of course, you have Dansby Swanson at shortstop, who's just a great shortstop, and Albies at second. And Freeman's an underrated first baseman for his fielding as well. I think I want to mention that as well. So fielding-wise, it's kind of a push. Offense and pitching is where it's going to come down. And pitching, once again, the both teams are just really good. There's just some incredible depth on both sides, for their pitching. You have these incredible starters for the Braves. Even if Clayton Kershaw doesn't have his best game for the Dodgers, he still is going to give you probably enough length to go through, probably get deep enough in the game. And again, just there's so much bullpen activity that Dave Roberts can use. So that'll be very interesting to see. I think that's pretty close as well. I think where it comes down is offense. The Braves, obviously, they've got their big guys. We saw some depth there from d'Arnaud in the last round, but they still got Acuna. They've got Freeman. They've got, and Ozuna. Those are their big guys. d'Arnaud hopefully shows up. Swanson gets a couple hits. That's good. When you look at the Dodgers, that's where you look at their offense and it's like, how are you going to beat this? You got, again, Mookie Betts. Incredible. Cody Bellinger, who had a rocky start, but now is hitting great. Pollock, Jock Peterson is still pretty dang good. Will Smith, a catcher for crying out loud, actually finished the regular season with a 164 OPS plus, 980 OPS. Great catcher. Chris Taylor has been hitting extremely well as well, and he's a threat on the base paths. And Justin Turner, again, another great season. I think there's one overwhelming advantage the Dodgers have, and it's their offense. And that, I think, is going to carry them to a victory here. As to how many games, I think the Dodgers will get it done in 5 or 6. Let's go with 6.
Oh, you're already giving games, too. You're confident in the Dodgers.
I'm very confident in them, yes.
It's interesting because Atlanta, I think, can hit with the Dodgers. I mean, Atlanta only scored 1 run fewer than the Dodgers in the East, where I'd argue they were facing better opponents than the Dodgers were throughout the year. So I'm interested to see where the offense comes in for the Braves. If Freeman and Acuna can pick it up and hit like d'Arnaud's been hitting and Ozuna's been okay, if you can keep that going, then I think you're all right. I actually think the big difference will come in the pitching. As good as Fried and Anderson have been, I just think the Dodgers' depth is too much. And they're the best. They were the best team in preventing runs, and they were the best team in scoring runs in the National League. That's got to mean something. They're the 2016 Cubs all over again. They're anointed to win. They are so far and above, I think, anyone that they might play that they could get a scare. And we know 2016 Cubs got a big scare in the World Series, but the Dodgers could get a scare by the Braves. But I think the Dodgers are the better team. I think the Dodgers win the series. I'll make it 6. Just I think the Braves will slug it, but my prediction is definitely the Dodgers.
So definitely going to be a great series regardless. Again, I think it's going to be mostly that pitching that's going to go back and forth. So going to be a really great one to watch. I'm not sure I really want to watch the other one, to be honest, just because of what has happened, to the Yankees from both of these teams in the past year, in the past couple of years. So it's going to be a very interesting matchup between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Houston Astros. On paper, of course, Tampa looks stronger. That said, Tampa is not getting as many rest days. The but as of the beginning of the ALCS is actually on October 11th. That's tomorrow. So they do not have a lot of time to rest their best guys. Glasnow is not going to be ready. Snell will be ready, but Glasnow will not, and he definitely gave them a very gutsy performance in Game 5. So there is a disadvantage there that Houston has because they, managed to finish up their series a heck of a lot earlier. So, it'll be very interesting how this shapes out. Once again, if you're trying to build it off, fielding, pitching, and offense. I think fielding-wise, the Rays are just an unbelievable team. I don't know if there's a better fielding team, honestly. So right there, I think they have a strong edge, just straight up. Position for we could do position by position, but I'm pretty sure the Rays just would. It's pretty clear cut in my mind. Then you look at pitching. Now, once again, the Rays, as we saw, they have this really great depth and a great manager to manage that depth in cash versus the Astros, where it's kind of been a surprise by surprise, seeing who's going to step up, who's going to be able to do it. It's going to be Urquidy this time, or is it going to be Christian Javier? It's these guys that I don't think are household names at all, and see what they can really do. So we're going to see. I think there's a clear edge right there, just in pitching depth for the Rays. In terms of actual pitching talent, don't get me wrong. Astros still, of course, they got Greinke, and McCullers can throw a gem, as we've seen in the past, but it's hard to see the, pitching for the Astros go as well as it has been and go well against the Rays. And then you look at offense. Now, offense is the other side of the coin. I think the Astros, especially in the past series, have shown that their offense is still the Astros offense. It's still dynamite. It's still excellent. And the Rays have shown a good offense, definitely very, very good. Arozarena in particular has been spectacular, as we've said. But when you're looking at this team as a whole, the Astros have their just incredible 4 or 5 big bats that you don't want to mess with. George Springer in the postseason is one of the most terrifying batters you want to see. Michael Brantley is a pesky guy. Correa and Bregman are going to bring it. Altuve's hitting. This is a terrifying offensive team. So it's going to be really interesting to see right there. As the adage goes, good pitching beats good hitting, and I would pick the Rays over the Astros. But at the same time, this is, as we've seen, I picked the Astros to lose in the first 2 rounds, and here we are.
Right.
So going to be an interesting one. I think if I had to give it to the Rays, I think it had to be Rays in 7.
I think I really like the way you ran through it for both teams. And I think something that needs to be mentioned, that despite the Rays not having Glasnow, they do have Snell, like you said, and they have Snell fully rested. I give Kevin Cash a lot of credit. You don't manage for the next day when you're playing a Game 5 elimination game, but he almost did. The way he used Glasnow, Glasnow threw 37 pitches after throwing 93 pitches in Game 2. He's the first pitcher to throw on 2 days rest since Derek Lowe in 2004. But he gave you what you needed to get, and you didn't have to use Blake Snell. So you have Blake Snell fully rested. You have Charlie Morton for Game 2. You figure out Game 3, and then you come back with Glasnow. And I think you're set up rotation-wise pretty well. I do wonder, though, that the Rays got pushed to 5 games on the brink of elimination against a Yankees team whose offense was really Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Hicks.
Yes.
You saw some other players contribute. Judge had a few home runs. LeMahieu had a few RBIs. Torres had a big home run. But for the most part, they held the Yankees' offense down. Now you have a Houston team that's hitting just as well as the Yankees did in the first round. Except they've been hitting like this for the whole postseason so far. And they've been coming back against good pitching in Oakland. It is, good pitching meets good hitting. I put a lot of stock into the Astros' lack of pitching. I think, Greinke's there. McCullers is there. But they haven't showed me that much, to be honest with you. I think I've been more impressed by Valdez than anybody else from his Game 1 relief performance in Minnesota. and his start in this series. So the question is does Houston have enough pitching to beat the Astros? I mean, do they have enough pitching to beat themselves, right? No, do they have enough pitching to beat the Rays? I just don't think they do. I got to go with the Rays. I'm going to go with the Rays in 6 because I like the way the Rays have set up their rotation to go Snell in game 1. I think if Snell wins game 1, then the Rays will be good to go. Snell's got to set the tone, and I think the Rays win this series. I think we've sort of been building to the Astros on this stage. As much as we hate to say it and as badly as they performed in the regular season, they are the villains of baseball. And so it makes sense for them to be here at this point and to get the national attention of the American League Championship Series. And I'm hoping that's the last we speak of the Astros for this postseason, because I do think the Rays are a superior team. And my predictions are the 2 best teams in each league going to the World Series.
Yeah, pretty reasonable prediction right there. Just want to also mention, I know obviously everyone knows that the Yankees and Astros have had their beef, but the Astros and the Rays have also had their pretty big, obviously very contentious. I think it was just last year in the ALDS where the Astros and the Rays face off, the Astros being the home team, and the home team won every game. So obviously, now that we know what happened with the Astros, them winning a home game was obviously was expected and not like, now we know there was something else at play. So Tampa has revenge. Like they want to take their revenge on Houston for what they could probably see as cheating them out of a spot against the Yankees last year. So it's really going to be like there's definitely beef here. I know a lot of people don't remember that, but I think the Rays are going to be bringing their A game. Obviously, they're bringing their A game, but they're going to be playing with a little extra intensity against them.
That ALDS Houston against Tampa last year was tremendous series. It's a shame that people don't remember it because Tampa was really good. I mean, they were battling Houston even at home. They had a really close game 2 in the game that Cole pitched. Obviously, Cole came back and pitched game 5 in Houston and won that game. But that was a great series. One that I actually thought was going to go the other direction, if I remember correctly, thinking back to my predictions for 2019. But they match up tremendously. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think there will be a little bit of a Rays trying to say, hey, we're going to beat you now. I think they had that attitude against the Yankees, too, despite them having the better record in the regular season, obviously dominating the head-to-head. Because the Yankees are still the Yankees and the Rays are still the Rays. And I think the Rays will always see themselves, like the Marlins probably do, as sort of that almost second-tier team. They'll never crack into that elite level, whether it be fan base or just attention the national media gives them. But now they're here. And they're playing tremendously, and it's hard to say anything other than this Rays team is one of the best teams we've seen in the last few years. So I think they're definitely going to get up for the Astros series. Like they got up for the Yankees series. They're playing again in San Diego, so they know the ballpark.
Yep, they do.
Now that they won a series there, and I'm excited for it. I think this American League Championship Series is going to be really good. I think the National League Championship Series is going to be really good. We've had an excellent playoffs, and I hope it continues. And it really is something that we needed, given the sort of weird nature of this abbreviated season. So I'm happy that the playoffs feel like the playoffs again.
Absolutely. Just given, I'm just happy we've had baseball this year in general, given the absolutely crazy year we've had. And it's definitely nice to see playoff baseball. Obviously it sucks the Yankees aren't, going to the World Series again, but it's definitely exciting still. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And I'm really looking forward to this.
So both of us are predicting the Rays to play the Dodgers in the World Series. A boring prediction, teams with the best record in each league. But that's what we're thinking going into these championship series, and it's going to be a great week.
Oh, it will.
So that's all we have today for episode 1 of the FWD podcast. Again, I'm Alex.
I'm Steve.
We look forward to hearing from you next time.
Till then, see ya.